You know, the Philippines is supposed to be full of resources, tons of human resources. Why isn't there enough money here without needing foreign investments to make it work?
Here's what I think is happening. A lot of these businesses that do exist here, they're usually owned by just a handful of families. 100 plus families that really control the business sector. That's not enough. That you can't have real liquidity just with that. The Constitution of the Philippines that we have right now, the 1987 Constitution, was ill-designed. It was hurriedly written. It was badly written. It has all the kinds of things that make the systems that we have in the Philippines not working.
So what if I told you that the system in the Philippines isn't broken? It's actually designed that way. Countries compete the same way companies compete.
Yeah.
And you said it best. Like, if a foreign company comes in here and they look at the Philippines, well, I want to operate in Southeast Asia. I want to capitalize on the low cost labor. But because of this constitution, I'd rather go to Vietnam, or I'd rather go to
Malaysia, or
right?
Indonesia, or yeah.
It's the reason why we're stuck in poverty, corruption, and all this political chaos. It's actually baked into the Constitution. And my guest today, Orion Perez, is the founder of the Correct Movement. He's here to expose the real reason why we're stuck in the Philippines and why we can't move forward. You're not gonna like everything that you hear today, but if you care about the Philippines, you should pay attention and you should really hear this. You told me that the politicians isn't the problem here. It's actually the system that creates the politicians. Let's just get straight to the point. Can you tell us every Filipino tell us what every Filipino doesn't understand about the Constitution that they should know about?
Well, one thing I'm going to say, John, thanks for having me here, is that the Constitution of the Philippines that we have right now, the 1987 Constitution, was ill-designed. It was hurriedly written. It was badly written. It has all the kinds of things that make the systems that we have in the Philippines not working.
Help me understand the Constitution here in the Philippines.
Well, okay, the Constitution that we have right now, the 1987 Constitution, was written after Ferdinand Marcos Sr. was deposed and he went to exile, and then he was taken over by, he was replaced by Corazon Aquino, right? And they set up a constitution in 1986, which was ratified in 1987, based on a lot of wish lists, a lot of, I guess, idealistic ideas of what they thought the Philippines should be. But those were based on wishful thinking, not so much based on solid research.
So I've heard videos from Lee Kuan Yew saying that the Philippines copied the Constitution from the United States, and that it didn't work because the United States had a vast amount of resources, and it would never work in Southeast Asia, would never have worked in Singapore. Did the Philippines copy the US Constitution?
In a way, it was inspired by the system in the United States of America. And here's what it is. Like you look at the terminologies used, like, for example, Senate, House of Representatives, departments, secretaries, president, vice president, etc. The terminologies used are all based on the US system. Under the hood, though, we actually have a system that is much more like Mexico's system.
Really?
Yeah.
Like, okay, so what's the difference? I don't even fully know what the Mexican Constitution versus the US Constitution. What's the difference?
Well, at least in the US, you have you have a president that can be president for 4 years, and then he can run for re-election, right? So we have a total of 8 years. So there is that ability to be reelected. Now, the Mexican system is exactly what we have in the Philippines, whereby the president only has a single 6-year term, and he can't run for reelection, even though how good he is.
How does that fundamentally change everything? Because between a 6-year term and being able to be reelected, how does that fundamentally change the way it works?
Okay, so what basically happens is the inability of the incumbent president to run for re-election actually means that the the incumbent will not be present in the next election. And therefore, all these challengers, all these would-be challengers, don't have someone to say, "Oh, we got to sort of consolidate, our forces to beat the incumbent." Now, the stuff I'm talking about is actually research work coming from a Japanese political scientist named Dr. Yuko Kasiya.
Okay.
And she came up, she had a book called Presidential Bandwagon, Parties and Party Systems in the Philippines. In that book, she argued that it was the introduction of the single 6-year term with no reelection that caused the disintegration, or rather caused the fragmentation of the political party system in the Philippines.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Like when they did this in the Constitution, I remember there was a 2-limit term for the president, for example, right?
Yeah.
And then I forget what it was for Congress. There was a limitation with Congress and Senate and so forth. And the purpose of that was to limit the term, sort of like, because they just came off from a monarchy and they didn't want that person to accumulate so much power.
Yeah.
Wasn't that kind of like the purpose of that, was to make sure that, one person wouldn't rule too long?
That's kind of what happened. So in the States, right? In the States, actually, at the federal level, you only have the term limit for the president. I'm not sure so much for the, but not the Senate and the Congress. Right. Now, the Philippines had a very similar system in the original Constitution of 1935. Actually, I'll clarify that. When the first Constitution of the Philippines under the American Commonwealth, the 1935 Constitution, when that came out, it originally did have a 6-year presidential term with no re-election. But that was promptly in 1940, I think, or 41, it was promptly changed. They realized, no, let's have an American-style system where the sitting president serves for 4 years and can get reelected for another 4 years. So they decided to copy that system. And all the other positions would not have term limits, just like in the States. But in 1987, the guys who framed the current 1987 Constitution, they came up with the term limits, where they said, if you're president, you have only 6 years. They went back to the original single 6-year term with no re-election. And then they added all these term limits for all other positions.
So some people say that, in the Philippines, we just need better leaders. Some people say that we need a benevolent dictator like Lee Kuan Yew was to make a difference here.
Well,
do you agree with that?
I agree that it would be nice to have that, but I would argue that the way the system was set up would make it so difficult for someone like Lee Kuan Yew, or even a Mahathir Mohamad from Malaysia, to emerge from within the Philippines because of the way the system we have is structured.
The system we're talking about, it's a democratic system.
It's a democratic presidential system.
Right.
So a presidential system.
So what we have is a democratic presidential system, but that doesn't work.
Yeah, there are other systems that out there, and the best systems are said to be the democratic parliamentary systems.
Okay.
So they're also democratic. It's just a slightly different way of doing things. So a presidential system, basically, you're voting one person who would be the leader, right? Whereas in a parliamentary system, you're actually voting for parties.
Okay.
And you're not really voting for the leader per se. You're voting for parties, right? And within the parties, the best among them become the leaders. So maybe there are probably 3 or 4 different parties that are serving. And the one that has the majority of all seats in the legislature, the leader of that party, he becomes the prime minister, right? And then in other, maybe the second party this guy probably becomes the leader of the opposition, right? And so the best or most capable person within each party gets into a position of leadership. Whereas in the presidential system, what you basically have is somebody puts his name out there and says, vote for me for this position. But the fact is that person might not necessarily be the best person for that position, but he might still win anyway because he's very popular.
Okay.
He enjoys a lot of name recall.
So Orion, we talked about this earlier yesterday. We have over 115 million people in the Philippines, a ton of talent, a ton of potential, big growth in GDP, but why can't we attract more liquidity and foreign investment?
Okay. And the reason why we're not able to do that is because our constitution fundamentally tells foreign companies, foreign investors, multinational corporations, we're basically saying we don't want you here. We've got clauses in the Constitution that basically say if you want to come in, you got to partner with a local investor who will own 60% of whatever it is you want to set up.
This is the biggest frustration I have about real estate investing here in the Philippines. It's the number one reason why I've become a quote unquote global real estate investor. It's not by choice. I'd rather be able to scale in my own backyard, which most smart real estate investors will do. But I've been forced to go overseas to invest in real estate because I believe in real estate. But the policies here make it so like I can't buy land unless I give a Filipino 60% of the ownership of the company that owns the land. And that's essentially saying I'm giving this person majority rights and say so. And that's been one of my biggest frustration. Even setting up companies here were the same way. I had to go and make sure we incorporated overseas in Singapore, for example. To run a company here, I had to be, in order to get foreign investment, I needed my company to be incorporated in Singapore, not a Philippines corporation. So I understand about this frustration. I bet it holds us back in so many areas.
It totally does. I mean, that's the reason why there are not that many jobs here locally. And if ever there are jobs, yes, there are jobs. They don't pay very good wages.
Right.
That's why the wages here are actually like 1/4, 1/5, or 1/6, or sometimes even 1/10 of what they are in places like Singapore.
Absolutely. It's a simple supply and demand problem, right?
Yep.
It's not because all the Filipinos just have low standard of living and they don't want to get paid more. It's just a supply and demand problem.
Supply and demand. The way things work here in the Philippines is there are too many job seekers and too few jobs.
Right.
So we produce a lot. We produce a lot of graduates, or universities or colleges. They produce a lot of graduates, but then where do they go for work?
But wait, the Philippines boasts a high GDP growth every year after year. In fact, I think they said the Philippines is one of the fastest growing countries in Asia now.
Yeah,
and the unemployment rate is pretty decent. That's what they say.
So
is that wrong? I mean, is there?
Well, so here's what happens, right? We look at the kind of GDP growth, and we find that this GDP growth is actually consumption driven, right? A lot of it is actually people going to malls and buying stuff, shopping and buying their basic necessities, and then we find out we trace how does this work out? Are these people who are employed here in the Philippines? Turns out a lot of them are not even employed in the Philippines. They're spending money. How do they do that? They're spending money that they receive as remittances from people from within their family who are working abroad.
So you think these numbers are misleading?
In a way they are, because it makes it seem like there's so many jobs here.
Right, because we've been hearing about the Philippines growth story for decades now, over a decade.
Yeah, it's growth stories in terms of consumption growth.
Okay.
Right? Consumption growth. But it's not so much the number of jobs increasing and all that, Maybe in certain sectors, yes, but generally speaking.
And there's not many major industries, right?
There are not that many major industries.
What are the biggest industries here?
Well, I remember hearing before there was so-called electronics. There was a time that there were a lot of and I think there probably still are a lot of companies.
Microchips and
yeah,
stuff.
microchips they've set up here and all that. But the real biggest industry really is exporting Filipinos to work abroad. That's really what it is.
That's a shame, right?
It's
Like
a real
it's always embarrassing to me that the Philippines boast about all the remittances they get from OFWs as a big part of their GDP growth. And it's just like, and you said it best to me. You said they've exported their middle class.
Yeah, yeah. That's really what it is. I mean, so a lot of the very poor people, they're here because they don't have a means of getting out, right? So they're stuck here and they're working in really, really low wage jobs. And these are the types of people who need housing, but they can't afford housing. Then there are the middle classes who live here, who are actually family members of people who are working abroad in relatively, I guess, more decent paying jobs. They form the so-called middle class here, but the real earners are not here.
Let's go back to the foreign investments, right? Help me understand this. The Philippines is supposed to be full of resources, tons of human resources, tons of capable talent, engineering talent, whatever. Why isn't there enough money here without needing foreign investments to make it work? Why isn't there any industrial growth in different sectors? Because I mean, a lot of mining happens here. There are resources here in the Philippines, and we lack the infrastructure development. I mean, even if you took taxpayer dollars and put it into infrastructure, I mean, there should be a pretty good growth story just from that alone.
There would be, but here's what I think is happening. A lot of these businesses that do exist here, they're usually owned by just a handful of families.
Okay.
It's probably just 100 plus families that really control the business sector, or companies, local companies here. That's not enough. That you can't have real liquidity just with that, right? Just 100 families. And so what really happens is you don't have that many job creating growth engines here.
So these top families that own all the sectors, they're not taking the profits and reinvesting it for future growth?
They probably are doing so, but then they're not. They're kind of in a way they're maxed out already.
Okay.
So there's not that many of them. And actually other countries had these problems too. Like even Singapore in the 1950s and 60s had these problems too. They had local investors, they had local businessmen, but there were not that many of them to be able to create enough local employment for people.
So the Singapore and Hong Kong
Yes.
are the ones that come to my mind in terms of the growth success story, right? Well, you have Japan, right? And Japan didn't take the same approach as Hong Kong and Singapore. Hong Kong and Singapore took a very different approach. They kind of opened it up.
For
foreign investments.
Yeah, Japan actually they already started back in the 1800s.
Uh-huh.
So that's, I mean, they started, I think, in the 1850s after the Tokugawa, after the Meiji Restoration came up. So after, Commodore Matthew Perry came and then brought in the U.S. Navy there and sort of said, hey guys, you got to open up. And that sort of shook the Tokugawa shogunate. And there was a regime change, which brought in the Meiji Restoration. And these guys decided, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to learn from the West. We're going to get all the ideas that we can, technologies, knowledge, everything. We'll learn from the West. And they did that. They learned from the West. They brought in foreigners. The movie The Last Samurai was based on that, where they brought in foreign military trainers and all that stuff, expats, to basically train their locals on how things are done in the West. Now, at that same time, they were also sort of like telling the landowners there, okay, look, you guys are rich, you have a lot of money, we need you to learn how Western corporations work. So you guys got to go there, learn how industrialization is done in England and in Germany, blah, blah, blah. Go there, study, come back, set up your companies.
And
They had that.
Singapore and Hong Kong did that with their financial system. They just opened up their financial system.
Yes.
There was tons of tax advantages to invest in there. Even setting up our corporation in Singapore, we trusted the governance of that country
Yeah.
to enforce and uphold contracts.
Indeed. I did want to say, so just going back to Japan, Japan had a longer horizon for them to develop all that. And then eventually they had the know-how. They also had a lot of local wealth in store. And so they were able to pull it off themselves in the 1800s, right? And then after World War II, they still had that know-how anyway. And they were also helped by the US.
Right.
So the US still had that, basically let's help these guys out. Otherwise, we don't want them turning into
they didn't want Japan turning into the communists.
Yeah, they didn't want them turning into the
after
communists.
World War II.
Indeed.
But they did the same here.
They did much less though, not in the same way that they did with Japan and Germany. So they're foes. The US, enemies of the US, actually seem to have gotten more resources or assistance.
Right.
Although we did have some help as well. So we got some aid. We also did get in a lot of investments from the US coming in. And that was aided by the fact that despite the existing anti-foreign investment restrictions that did exist at a lesser scale, after World War II, the Philippines actually had this parity rights agreement, which allowed anything that said, we will have preferential treatment for Filipinos and Filipino companies, that would be understood as Filipinos and Americans.
Okay.
So American companies were able to come in here based on those laws, because whenever the word Filipino came in, that was reinterpreted as Filipinos and Filipino companies and Americans and American companies.
Because of the war.
Because of the war, because of that.
Because America was considered the savior of.
They were considered the savior.
Of War II.
And also the Americans basically said, okay, we're going to give you guys aid, reconstruction aid, but we need you to allow American companies to come in.
Right.
So that's why we had that parity rights agreement. And in fact, the parity rights agreement actually helped us out. That's why the Philippines, after World War II, was one of the top, better performing economies in Asia.
It went through the golden period during the 70s or something like that, right? Was it
before the 70s,
before the 70s?
Before the 70s. So we were actually like number 2 compared to Japan in Asia. So that happened because we had the parity rights agreement.
So I really agree with you in terms of the country not having enough liquidity and foreign investments, especially in sectors like energy, where it requires such massive investment. Energy costs here is through the roof, and people don't realize how high it is compared to other countries. It's massive. It's expensive.
It's massive.
It's really expensive. I don't know how people can afford it here.
And here's the other thing, John. I'm going to say it's not just money; it's money and know-how.
Right.
So I think that could be one of the bigger problems, because at least having foreign investors to come in means some of these foreign companies bringing in technology, know-how.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that we can learn from. And when that happens, we'd be able to upgrade our facilities to have more efficient energy production, energy distribution, which we currently don't have.
But China did it. China took the West, the know-how, and they learned it, but they didn't give up ownership. It worked in China. And so I'm gonna ask you this, like, there is a reason why they set up the Constitution this way. It's probably due to 300 years of colonialism, right? And so they wanted to protect themselves from these foreigners invading this country and taking over. I think
so,
right?
yeah.
And that's what it was really set up for.
I think that's partly it. And there's this, I don't know, psychological mental block,
right? Basically
saying, no, foreigners are probably bad, so keep them out. There was also in the 1950s, 1960s, I think, there was this trend, particularly in Latin America, called the dependency school. It's a school of economics that was set up by Latin American economists who basically preached that foreign investors are bad, et cetera, et cetera. You
Right.
know, if multinational corporations are just there to exploit the locals, blah, blah, blah. That's where Singapore basically deviated from the pack. They basically said, no, 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 we don't believe that. We're going to basically say, foreign investors, we can bring the foreign investors in and we just keep an eye on them to make sure they're doing the right things. But as long as they create jobs for our people, they train our people, they're good. And that's what they did. They just really, I mean, they always told the foreign investors, you're welcome, just don't do anything stupid. Just don't do anything bad.
So one system worked. Singapore opened it up to foreigners. Foreigners can come in, invest, have full ownership.
Full ownership.
Right.
Yeah.
And they can innovate, teach, build, capitalize.
Exactly.
And here's another system like China. China worked too. And
well, here's where I'm going to sort of come in and say, actually, so in 1979, China, under Deng Xiaoping, he basically said, well, you know what? We need to learn from Singapore. Because he, in 1978, November of 1978, Deng Xiaoping actually visited Singapore. And he got so impressed with how Singapore was a fast-growing country. It was getting rich. And he said, what are you guys doing to do this? Lee Kuan Yew basically told Deng Xiaoping, hey, what we simply did was to bring foreign investors in, and we let them come in and create jobs. And these companies paid taxes. The people that were their employees paid taxes. And eventually we had money to spend for building roads, building bridges, building hospitals, building schools, et cetera, and all that stuff. And that's where Deng Xiaoping said, you know what? Bringing in foreigners is not such a bad idea after all. So that's why right after that, he decided...
That's what they opened up China.
That's why they opened up China. That's why he created Shenzhen and all these other special economic zones.
They did it without... Foreigners couldn't come in and own straight up companies. They had to do it in some sort of JV. In a similar way, right?
There were a lot of companies that they allowed 100% ownership.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they did. They did.
Okay.
So there were companies, yes, where they, they allowed, they said 100% come in. There were also some companies where they basically said, well, we're gonna target this type of company to be, we would like you guys to come in, do a joint venture with us, but we want to learn from you. So there were certain cases where that happened. But in many other cases, it was really just straight out, we need you to come in here and create jobs for our people. And we need you to come in here. They were fine with that. Just as long as the job creation was there. And yes, people who were their employees would also learn from the technology that was coming in from these foreign companies.
So isn't this current administration trying to push for that right now? Is the Marcos administration pushing to open up foreign ownership rights?
From what I know, yes, they were, and I think they still are.
Right.
But I mean, to credit the current administration, I think they do want to ease the restrictions in the Constitution. For me, being an a longtime OFW myself, I was based in Singapore for the longest time. I want to make it clear to fellow Filipinos that, hey guys, we're lagging behind the rest of the region when it comes to bringing in foreign direct investors.
Well, I see them doing it with the infrastructure projects that they're doing. Like one example is the Makati subway. And then a lot of major infrastructure projects are so-called funded by these PPP loans or investments. And they're primarily now coming from China in terms of loans.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And there's actually a danger to that because China's global influence strategy has a lot to do with debt and using debt to companies that, over leveraging countries where they can't pay back their debt. And that could be a potential risk that we're facing.
Yeah, I'm hearing about that. I've been hearing about that from before, the so-called debt trap, right? Yeah. Now, what I understand is China per se isn't looking to really trap countries into getting into debt. It's more like, well, no one else wants to fund it. Nobody else wants to lend you money for this kind of project. We are.
The Japanese was one too.
Yes,
we had the
yes.
Japanese, and cost of capital in Japan was always the lowest anywhere in the world. So in this particular case, I mean, the Makati the Manila subway was largely funded, I think, operated and funded by the Japanese at one point. But now, so some of this stuff switched to Chinese funding. And some infrastructure projects have gone from Japanese funding to Chinese funding, and even though the Japanese funding was at favorable rates compared to China, for whatever reason, I don't fully understand it. Right. So I know Philippines has gotten funding from Korea and Japan in the past for other infrastructure projects, but my point is this: you know. This is, and like just like a company, you can finance things through debt or investments.
And that's why I'm saying we have to just concentrate on investment. Like, bring the companies in. I mean, I don't care who owns the companies. I mean, like me again. I'm a former OFW, and I worked abroad working for non-Filipino companies. So actually, all these people working abroad. All these Filipinos working abroad, we don't care who we're working for.
Right.
Now, what about if we actually had these Filipinos working here in the Philippines, staying with their families? You don't have the broken family problem anymore. They're here in the Philippines, working for the same companies that they're actually working for abroad. Why not allow those companies to come here en masse, right? That's what I'm basically saying, that we need to change. But they're not going to come here if they take a look at our Constitution, the 1987 Constitution, and they see all these little clauses that basically say we don't want you here.
Right.
The 60-40 clauses, the Article 12, Section 10, that stuff, 10, 11, and basically like, oh, you want to have a company here? You're going to need to find a local partner who owns 60%, and that sort of thing. They see that, right? Yeah. So all these companies, whenever they, these companies in their corporate boardrooms, many of them are probably thinking from the very beginning, hey, we'd like to set up in the Philippines because they have a lot of people, well-trained, well-educated, talented people. And we'd like to be able to take advantage of the fact that most of them speak English. So let's set up in the Philippines, manufacture there or whatever. And then their board will basically say, wait. You can't just go to the Philippines and make a decision like that. We need you to look at 3 or 4 different options, right? Side by side, vet them. You basically canvas, right? Canvas. Oh, Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, whatever. And then they're going to look at all these 5 different countries and look for reasons to start eliminating them.
Right. I mean, look, there's a fundamental difference between debt and investments, right? Let's talk about that first so that people understand the clear difference. The reason why Singapore was so successful was because Singapore said, what did they say? You can come in, make the investment. If you lose money on it, that's your problem.
That's your problem. Yeah.
You took the risk. You tried to make something work in our economy. It didn't work. Whatever.
What? Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But if it did work, you got the profit.
You get the profit. You can make money.
You got the upside.
Exactly.
Right. Versus and now what we're doing is says we don't want that. We'll take on debt.
Yeah.
Right? Which we're going to have to pay back regardless of whether the project works or not.
Exactly.
Right? And then, so if we're talking about attracting, so we know that there's a benefit of attracting investments. Now, I've been saying this. Countries compete the same way companies compete.
Yeah.
And you said it best. Like if a foreign company comes in here and they look at the Philippines, well, I want to operate in Southeast Asia. I want to capitalize on the low cost labor. But because of this constitution, I'd rather go to Vietnam or I'd rather go to
Malaysia,
or right?
Indonesia, or yeah. That's what's going to happen basically. Because so what happens is in these boardrooms, right? They look at all 5 countries that they're looking at, the Philippines included, and at the first round, they're going to look at, okay, let's compare their constitutions.
Right.
So they look at the Philippine Constitution, they look at the Thailand Constitution, they look at the Indonesian Constitution, the Malaysian Constitution, the Singapore Constitution, maybe the Vietnamese Constitution. And the Philippines sticks out like a sore thumb as the only country that has anti-foreign investment restrictions in the Constitution.
And explain why that is so significant. So somebody might not understand, well, what's the difference? Why? Who cares? One is a law, because there are protectionism laws in other countries.
Yes.
Right? Like in Vietnam, I can't buy property.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying it's different here because it's in the Constitution.
Yeah. Because in a country where they put the restrictions in the Constitution, it's a lot harder to change. Whereas when it's a law, they might decide at some point, you know what, let's ease it up, let's make it easier. And they just need a majority vote to make that change, and it's changed, right? In the Philippines, I'll make this very clear, we are not as easy as the USA. So in the US, you want to make changes to the Constitution, you need a 2/3 vote.
Okay.
Right? A 2/3 vote to make it happen. So for example, the 13th Amendment that got rid of slavery,
Right.
that required a 2/3 vote of both houses, right? And in the Philippines, if we let's say we had slavery here in the Philippines, to try to get rid of that clause that talks about slavery, we would need 3/4 vote of both houses.
Okay.
3/4.
Okay.
So it's not in the States, it's 2/3.
Right.
Here in the Philippines, it's 3/4. So it's a lot harder to change the Constitution. Right? So it makes it really, really hard. The threshold required to make a simple change. Like you want to change this comma into a period? Just let that little change, or maybe change the spelling, or change one little word. It's only that little word. You're going to need 3/4 of both houses to make that change.
I get a lot of comments from people, foreigners, and Filipinos about foreigners owning real estate here, right? And they tell me all these loopholes. Oh, well, you can buy it under this. You can create dummies for the corporation, blah, blah, blah. And I always just say, you know what? It's in their Constitution. Don't fuck with their Constitution. It's like, why would you want to go against that?
That's the thing, right? If we're talking about loopholes, then you're actually taking out all the decent companies from the equation. The only ones who are willing to actually bend the rules are the shady ones.
Right.
So major Fortune 500 IT companies that want to set up here, they're not going to go for some dummy
Instead, you get pogos.
That's why you ended up only with pogos. It was only pogos who are willing to come here because they're the only ones willing to bend the rules and easily come in and, it's so lax, and all that stuff. We just need to pay people off and that's it. But Fortune 500 companies, they're governed by the laws from back home.
Right.
And if they're
publicly traded.
They're publicly traded, right?
If
they're found out that they did something really bad, I mean, there's
some loophole in
they
some
could
other
get
countries.
delisted,
Totally.
and a lot of major penalties will come their way.
Absolutely.
Now, that's the reason why we're not really easily able to get really great companies coming in and creating great paying jobs here, because we're pissing off, or we're basically taking off from the equation all these really good companies who are not willing to go through all these so-called loopholes. Yeah, but there is a way to do that. You can.
Oh my God!
Oh,
Every time I heard that,
right? Like you can go around it. You can get a dummy, and you can.
That's the fundamental problem here. Is like everything is a workaround, right?
Yeah. Well, that's a society that's ruled by lawyers. I hate to say that, but that's the problem with the Philippines. So we're not ruled by scientific, technocratic people who know deep root cause analysis type of problem solving. No, we're a society that's ruled by lawyers. And it's lawyers who basically win cases by basically making guilty people look innocent, or getting people guilty people to get acquitted through technicalities. I mean, that's
okay. So what
that's
you're
the
saying is
training.
lawyers are good about gaining the system and working, bending rules to make it work for them,
Yeah.
right? And so that's kind of like how they operate here.
That's
It's
how they
just
operate
like
here.
finding workaround solutions for everything here, but none of the structure of it makes sense.
Yeah, they never really look at solving the root causes, getting rid of the real deep-seated problems that are causing all these little symptoms
Yeah.
here. For them, it's like, okay, there's a little symptom here. We can sort of make that go away
Right.
by doing this. But when you do that,
Okay.
the real problem starts coming out in another way.
Right.
There's another symptom that comes up.
So let's say we do fix this constitution.
Mhm.
What do you think is going to happen? How do you see this playing out? Let's paint the picture here.
Okay, so to fix the Constitution, we're going to need to concentrate on three different things. The first one is to make it easier for foreign investors to easily come in. So that's very simple. Get rid of all provisions in the Constitution, any text in the Constitution that says we don't like foreigners. Oh, foreigners are not allowed to practice their professions, or foreigners are not allowed to own property, or foreigners are not allowed to own corporations, blah, blah, blah. Anything that says that, just get rid of it from the Constitution. Delete, right? Any single clause that talks about making investors from outside of the country feel unwelcome, just take that out. There are ways of creating regulations and restrictions that don't involve the Constitution. We can always do that in legislation or in policy, where it's easier to make changes or tweaks without having to go through a 3/4 vote of both houses and then a plebiscite. By the way, that's the other extra thing here in the Philippines. After any single change that is made by both houses of Congress through a 3/4 vote, there will still need to be a plebiscite, a nationwide plebiscite. Yes or no? Do you agree with the change? Yes or no? It's a really expensive exercise.
So it's really hard to change it.
It's really hard to change it. So when all these companies see that the Philippine Constitution has these 60/40 anti-foreign investment restrictions and other anti-foreign investment restrictions embedded in the Constitution itself, they stay away.
Okay.
You know what? I don't want to have to deal with this.
Okay.
I'm probably going to get in trouble later on. And I'm going to say one thing. There are instances in which some of the restrictions, like the ones in Article 12, Section 11, which deals specifically with the public utilities restrictions, that have been weaponized. They've been weaponized against companies that are not public utilities. Like, for example, FedEx.
Mm-hmm.
Federal Express is a courier company. But long ago, many years, I think it was 20 plus years ago, where there was a local courier that didn't like the fact that a lot of people were getting their couriering done through FedEx. They filed a case against FedEx, and what ended up happening was the courts. It went up to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals upheld this decision, saying, "Oh yeah, FedEx is in fact in violation of the 1987 Constitution because FedEx is a public utility, and yet they are owned by Americans. They're an American company, and that's not allowed."
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right? It was weaponized against a company that is not a public utility
to protect the conglomerates here, basically.
Yeah, that's what happened. I'll give you another example.
Right.
Angkas.
Yeah.
So Angkas is the ride hailing. It's like the Grab for motorcycles, right? And it was set up actually as an IT company, basically an IT, what do you call this? A web app company for ride hailing, right? Set up by Angeline Tam, who's Singaporean. And it was her idea, so she set up the company. She was the majority shareholder. And then you had all these transport operators who were angry at the fact that, well, no one's riding us that much. They're all going through Angkas. because of course the traffic's so bad. So people just want to ride motorcycles to wind through traffic, right? And so these guys, I think they were, I don't know, I'm not sure, taxi operators or whatever, Franchise Regulation Bureau, LTFRB. And LTFRB then said, oh, look, Angkas is in violation of the Constitution because they are operating a public utility.
Right.
They're not a public utility.
Right.
They're operating a public utility while being owned majority by a Singaporean, Angeline Tam, right? And you know what happened? Well, luckily, Angeline Tam is married to a Filipino, George Giroyeta, right? And so instead of them basically arguing the reality that, hey, wait a minute, we're not a public utility. We're an IT company. We're an IT tech startup that creates a mobile app for ride hailing, right? And that's why we were not subjected to the 60-40 rules. They basically just said, oh, you know what? So that there's no more trouble. So that there's no more trouble. What we are going to do is to, okay, honey, you own my shares, huh? Okay, your shares, my shares are your shares now. I think that's what happened. I think Angeline probably just said, you know what, honey, she told her husband, here, you're going to be the main owner so that we don't get harassed and extorted or whatever by these fiends. So that's what happened. It's always weaponized. The Constitution is weaponized against companies that are not in violation of the Constitution. But just because there are people who don't like the competition that these new game players, are bringing in.
Because a lot of the colonized countries in the past do have like foreign ownership restrictions.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. But then why is it that a lot of them are now deciding to be more open, and then we're still stuck in this old way of thinking?
Right.
So that there's something wrong in that respect.
Like, okay, so like I know Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, they all have protectionist rules. What's the difference here in the Philippines?
Okay, so in a nutshell, when we look at the bigger picture of how these work, it's kind of like the Philippines has a huge sign that says, we don't want you here.
Okay.
We have a huge sign, we don't want you guys here. And then we have little fine print that says, oh, by the way, but we can make exceptions to allow you guys to come in if you do this and do that. So we have that. Whereas in other countries, it's like, we're okay to have you come over. And then they have fine print that says, oh, there are certain things that we also don't want, though. So
it's the optics.
It's the optics. The optics are, we don't want you here, but we'll make some exceptions to allow some here in. Right. The other countries, it's we're open to allow you guys to come in, but we have some restrictions that will not allow certain types of companies to come in. So that's kind of the main difference. It's like we're much more restrictive. And that's why when you look at the OECD Foreign Investment Restrictiveness Index, we're number 3 in the world. We're beaten only by, I think it was the Palestinian Authority and Libya. We're number 3. Yeah.
We're the number 3
in the entire country.
Worst foreign restriction.
Yeah.
Holy shit! I had no idea.
It's that bad.
You're comparing this to like we're talking. What about Iran, Iraq, the Middle East?
Well,
all these countries.
No, we're number 3.
Really?
We're number 3 compared to the
China, the communist countries, Russia, China, Vietnam.
They're not as bad as we are.
Wow.
We're number 3. They're probably number 10 or something. I don't know. I didn't really check, but when I saw that we were number 3, I mean that was bad enough. So yeah.
I would have expected that to be taking place by communist countries would be the worst.
But that's the thing, right? A lot of these communist countries have sort of ceased to be communist in pure theory now. I mean, like China, the fact that they became so pro-business and open to foreign investors, at one point in time becoming kind of like the manufacturing place in the world, right? American companies, British companies, come here and manufacture your stuff, right? And that's what they did, right? They became the factory of the world. And Vietnam basically said, well, there's this fellow communist country that's doing that. We might as well follow.
Right.
That's why they ended up with the Doi Moi reforms of 1986.
If we are able to get rid of these foreign ownership restrictions, are we in the clear? Is that all we need to fix the problems that we're dealing
Not
with?
yet.
Okay. What's going to solve the problem here?
Okay, so obviously it's a good thing when you remove the anti-foreign investment restrictions, because that means the country itself as a whole has opened up and it's like more welcoming now.
Yeah.
But by default, many of these companies are going to say, oh, well, the most developed place is actually Metro Manila. We might as well all go there. Right. So that's what's going to happen is by default, we'll just suddenly go there and swoop into Metro Manila. But what's going to happen is a lot of overcrowding, overpopulation, traffic congestion, and all that stuff, you know?
So, I mean, maybe you can explain something to me that I haven't been able to wrap my head around yet. I want to understand this. Why is Metro Manila so crowded and the rest of the country so underdeveloped? Like, is there a clear reason why that is?
Well, that's because of the way the system was set up. The system was set up to be was unitary and over-centralized around Metro Manila. And I think by design, a lot of politicians in the past, I think they wanted to do that to get as many Filipinos from all around the country coming to Metro Manila, assimilating into Metro Manila, losing their ethnic identities, and then eventually, when there is a time when we do decentralize, they go back to their country, to their areas, and they bring the Manila culture, Tagalog speaking, blah, blah, blah. And
are you saying this was some sort of like ethnic cleansing?
I think it was. I mean, by design, probably this is how they, I don't know, subconsciously thought of it.
That's interesting.
I think it's part of this, like, we need to eradicate all these different ethnic
because it was tribal.
cultures.
I mean,
Tribal.
Philippines had so many different tribes, so many different languages, right?
Exactly.
So the language thing makes sense, right? So, I mean, you think about the colonial powers spreading English, Spanish, French to the rest of the world. I mean, if you were government and you needed to have power over your people, you needed to be on the same communication platform.
Yeah.
Right? So that kind of makes sense of why the government would want to centralize.
But yeah, again, of course, the key problem I'm seeing is, well, okay, so we did that, but then we clogged our waterways. We ended up having flooded areas. We ended up having major traffic congestion and, you know, traffic jams everywhere. We tried to set up all kinds of Band-Aid solutions that would sort of ease that traffic by coming up with the number coding system.
So how did they do this? How did they do this? Did they just keep all the resources and the money here?
Yeah.
And they basically starved all the provinces and the different islands? Like,
I think
how did that work?
Just simply inertia. Just because most of the main decision making is here in the capital, a lot of the, let's say national business permits and stuff like that are here. I mean, because this is where the seat of government is. It just became easier for companies to set up shop here, and there was no effort to create these kinds of agencies in each of the different regions or provinces. You know, maybe they didn't think of actually doing that, and because of that, it just became much more convenient to do everything in Metro Manila.
And I thought the reason for that convenience was because of the lack of infrastructure development.
Yeah, that's partly it too. Yeah,
right.
That's partly it. Now think about it. If we actually were a lot more decentralized, each subnational unit would have to sort of fend for itself, or at least, you know, fix their own infrastructure problems. Mm-hmm. And they try to also sort of bring in investors and businesses and companies to come in and create jobs for their people there, so that, number one, they'd still have a taxpayer base, right? And all that. And people wouldn't have to just sort of all go to Metro Manila and leave the place deserted.
Well, you have 3 centers, don't you? Don't you have like Manila, Cebu, and Davao? Isn't that kind of like the
that's
central?
It kind of happened just because naturally, you also can't have everything purely in Metro Manila. But hey, how many provinces are there? What, 81 provinces? Why can't we have 81 major economic centers, at least one per province? Or okay, let's say there are how many, 18 regions? Why aren't we having 18 regional centers?
Could it be a lack of funding?
That's probably partly it, but the way I see it, the main thing is really the way things have been structured according to the Constitution. It's just because everything is so centralized based on the unitary system, there's no incentive whatsoever for different regions to act the way they would in the States or in other countries that are federal. Because at least in countries like the US, you're not talking about only one place that is the only place for making money. You're talking about several different places. There's New York City, there's Houston, there's San Francisco, Los Angeles, there's Seattle, there's Chicago, everywhere. So many different places because each state tries to at least have one per state, one major city per state.
You talk a lot about how federalism is part of the solution. What exactly is federalism?
Well, okay, federalism, and you being from the States, you'd understand is that you'd have
your federal government.
The federal government, and then you've got states.
Right.
Or maybe in another country like Canada, they'd have the federal government, and then they call them provinces.
Right.
Or maybe in Germany, they'd have the federal government, and then they have the Länder. Or,
do we not have that here in the Philippines? Like, don't you have like the executive power that is the federal government?
Unfortunately, no, we don't have it at the same level. So they don't have the ability to make legislation in the same way that the national government would have.
So the national government doesn't set rules and laws and policies that governs every single Filipino?
They do. It's one size fits all, right? Because so all the laws that we have in the Philippines apply to all Filipinos everywhere in the Philippines. But what I'm saying is I don't think that's the best way to do things because the contexts per region may not be the same. There might be regions where it's more mountainous. Probably they should be focusing a bit more on mining and certain types of economic activities. And they probably should have certain laws that are specific to them that make sense for them, which may be different from places that are not mountainous or that are more, I don't know, port areas near the sea, that sort of thing. I don't know.
So you're not saying that the national government should have more power. You're saying they should have less power, and the provinces and local government units should have more power. Is that correct?
Yeah, they should have more decision-making power for certain things that make sense for them.
Right.
Yeah, particularly for economic activities like being able to bring in investors to their area. They should be able to set up, I don't know, tax policies, certain policies that can make themselves much more attractive to investors.
So then you would have different taxes in each province and stuff like that. Isn't that what's currently going on now?
We don't have that.
Huh.
We don't have that. Yeah.
Recently, they announced that the Makati subway portion of the Makati subway was canceled because of a territorial dispute between Taguig and Makati. And basically, the local governments couldn't agree on a line that would ultimately affect millions of Filipinos, not just living in Taguig and Makati. And this was a case of local government units that had, to me, from the outside perspective, looked like they had too much power.
Yeah, that's true, actually. That's true in the sense that they have certain powers. They have certain powers that are very different from put it this way. They have jurisdiction over their particular areas, right? And they may have very different ways of wanting to do certain things. And there's nothing that really forces them to cooperate, right? We've got the MMDA,
right,
that sort of tries to coordinate them, but they don't have real authority over these guys. And unlike say in a country like say Japan. In Japan, you have metropolitan Tokyo, right? And so you've got Tokyo, Shibuya, all these different little cities, Minato, blah blah blah, and they're all governed. They're all cities that form part of Tokyo, metropolitan Tokyo, which is ruled by a governor.
Right.
Right? And so this governor actually has the ability to, rein these guys in or say, hey, this is going to be the policy for. There's something that consolidates all of them somehow. We don't have that here. The MMDA doesn't have the ability to do that.
Right.
Right? And that's why also we do need federalism, because federalism is going to rationalize a structure for which Metro Manila would be
Got it.
would be sort of governed under a regional structure as well.
So there's basically a missing layer in government.
There's a missing layer. Yeah.
You have the local, like you have the barangays and you have the local government units, and then you have the national authority.
Yeah.
But there's nothing in between.
There's
What
nothing
you're
in
saying
between.
Is you need this layer in between.
We need that extra layer, a regional layer, to sort of bring these, for example, the cities together, the cities of Metro Manila together, and that would bring them. It would turn them into something like how metropolitan Tokyo is governed, or say, for example, Paris is also governed. So like Paris is made up of all these little districts called the arrondissement, and then you've got the mayor of metropolitan Paris,
Right.
who handles all of these different arrondissements, which have numbers basically.
Right.
We don't have that here. You have all these very separate, autonomous cities who are keen to basically sort of exert their independence and say,
Right.
we're different from you guys. We're going to do things differently.
Right.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And that's
So okay.
one thing about what happened to Metro Manila really is that it exploded because during the reconstruction of, post-war, post the World War II, a lot of the aid money was given to the national government. The national government was in Metro Manila, was in Manila, and so the spending was more easily done in Manila.
Right.
And so all this news traveled fast about, there are these construction jobs happening in in the Manila area, so let's go there. So people from all around the Philippines started
Flocking here because this is where you would be able to make money.
Yeah. And that's what happened, right? We had all these so-called new job opportunities sprouting because of all this infrastructure spending, all the reconstruction, rebuilding, companies coming in and all that stuff. But maybe because the urban planning wasn't good, there wasn't much thinking about creating public housing and all that stuff, you ended up having all these slums, the makeshift favela type slums here in all around, dotted through Metro Manila. So, all this makeshift housing, and there was no real public housing that was created for them. And so we have this mess that we have today, and I feel that the only real way to sort of fix this is to make sure that we're able to decentralize the country through federalism that would basically give each of the different subnational units, like regions, for example, the ability to set up policies that can more easily attract job-creating investors to come to those areas, develop those areas so people don't need to flock to Metro Manila.
Yeah.
And people in Metro Manila would decide, you know what? Life is too expensive here, but my hometown, my original hometown is booming, might as well go back. And that would create this real major urban renewal of Manila. Okay, maybe you're going to end up with less people, but you're going to have more quality jobs. I mean, this might become a much better place, right? Not as congested. Maybe it's going to be a place where it's, I guess, much more into, I don't know, financial stuff. I don't know, stock market related things like that, and service stuff. But then all the, say, manufacturing and other key jobs would now be scattered all around the country.
Right.
Yeah.
No, we've heard a lot from a lot of our podcast guests about decentralization being a big solution to the big overall problem.
Indeed.
And I was just kind of thought it was just a lack of industries and a lack of infrastructure that really, there wasn't enough economic centers around, right?
Yeah.
If there was, maybe the money would be spent towards the infrastructure needed to bridge those economic centers. You're talking about these guys. Let's just face it. I mean, politics is business in the Philippines, isn't it? Like, the way I see it, I don't really understand politics here in the Philippines, I'll be honest. But the way I see it from the outside looking in, to me, if you are in politics, you basically pretty much print money, sort of say. Right? I mean, it's like there's no business like the business of politics here, right? So and the way I keep seeing it is like you'll see the politicians are like it's basically the family name. That keeps getting reelected. Right? And probably has something to do with the way votes are bought. Right, and it's like once you become the political leader, your next job, you're always trying to make sure you win the next election and the next election. Why? Because there is some financial benefit to it. I'm assuming. Correct me if I'm wrong. Explain to me why do we keep electing like the same people, the same families, the same political dynasties, even celebrities? Like, what's happening here?
Okay, the problem of the Philippines, why we always end up having the same names, the same types of politicians, the same and celebrities. Why do we end up having that? It's because the way our system is structured is that it's all based on name recall. It's based on popularity. The way our ballots are set up is that it's names of people that are very prominent. You don't even have anything.
Is it really popularity, or is it like who's going to buy the votes?
Well, the popularity is also part of that. Yeah.
Okay.
Popularity is part of that. I mean, there are cases where if you're so popular, you don't even need to buy votes because people already know who you are. Whereas buying votes sort of just helps to.
Let's just stop for a second and just realize what we're talking about here. Okay. We talk about buying votes in the Philippines like it's just common knowledge.
Yeah.
But we're supposed to be in a democracy here. You're not supposed to buy votes in a democracy.
And the reason why that's happening is related to one of the first things we talked about the lack of jobs here, the lousy economy, the fact that there are not that many jobs in the Philippines. So if we had more jobs, right, in all these local communities, if people had decent jobs, any politician who tries to give them an envelope and say, hey, I'd like you to vote for me, here's some money, something like, I don't know, 10. People would actually say, if they had decent jobs, they would say, what do you take me for?
Right.
I mean, I'm insulted that you'd even think you could buy me.
There's some level of integrity and
pride.
Right.
There's actually a level of pride. So in all these other societies all around the world where people all are gainfully employed, there is a sense of not just integrity, it's pride. Like, I work hard for my money. What do you think? You think you can just buy me off?
Right.
I mean, you think I'm so poor that you'll just flash 5,000 pesos in front of my face and you think I'm going to just think that's cool? What do you think? You know, that's how it is in other countries. But here in the Philippines, because people don't have jobs or they're paid pathetic wages, oh yeah, please, thank you. Could you give me more?
People tell me that politicians here want to keep people poor and stupid and uneducated. Is that true?
In a way, the incentive structure is like that. Because when it makes it easier for them to continue to get voted for when it's easy to
makes
manipulate
the vote
people.
cheaper and easier to buy, right?
Exactly.
So then what hope do we have in a democratic system?
That's why we need to shift the system over from one that is just way too name recall centric to shift over to one that is at least party centric.
So what system would you think would work here in the Philippines?
That's why I'd say let's look at other countries that have similar cultures to the Philippines but are doing a little better. So the Philippines we have an Austronesian background, Malayo-Polynesian background, and there are other countries in the region with that background. Malaysia, for example, the majority of the people there are also Malayo-Polynesian, Austronesian. Languages are kind of similar. in Malaysia, right? The Malay language. And they are clearly better run. I mean, they're not perfect, but they're clearly better run than we are here in the Philippines. And that's because they're using a parliamentary system.
Okay, I don't really know much about parliamentary system. How does it work differently compared to the system that we have now?
Okay.
And was Singapore the same?
Yes, Singapore also has a parliamentary system.
Ah, okay.
It's kind of like if we're going to talk, for example, of why is it that Malaysia was able to have 22 years of Mahathir Mohamad, this really great visionary type leader in Malaysia, who's very similar to Lee Kuan Yew. And then why did Singapore also have Lee Kuan Yew? There was this professor named Professor Alex Magno who wrote an article where he said, well, you know what? In these countries like Singapore and Malaysia, if they had the same kind of system that we have in the Philippines, there would be no Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore. If Singapore had a presidential system like the one we have, Malaysia, if they had a Philippine-style presidential system in Malaysia, they would also not be able to have Mahathir Mohamad.
Why?
Because these guys are so no-nonsense. They're not the types who would, do the song and dance numbers and all that stuff, the pop culture, blah, blah, blah crap. That a lot of politicians need to do.
So are you saying
they don't do that.
Under a parliamentary system, they didn't have to gain votes?
They do. They do still have to gain votes, but they do it differently. Because in a presidential system, we have to talk about yourself. You have to talk about yourself, build up your name, vote for me. That's just my name, right? And it's all about name recall. It's about popularity. You try to find ways to be remembered by people. So that on voting day, I remember, I need to vote for this guy, right? But in a parliamentary system, the focus is on their political parties because the ballots are actually designed in a way that what's prominent is the party emblem and the party name. And there may sometimes be the name of the local politician there, but it's a much smaller font.
Well, okay. I'm trying to follow you here. Like, if the Philippines was a parliamentary system, couldn't there still be vote buying?
There might still be. But actually, the vote buying is a consequence of the massive poverty that we have, thanks to the lack of jobs. We talked about that earlier, about the fact that we don't have that many jobs thanks to the anti-foreign investment restrictions that we have, right? Now, so we get rid of those problems, get rid of those restrictions, bring the investors in, bring the job-creating companies in, people start to have jobs. They're not going to be asking for money from politicians. In fact, it may even turn out at some point where the moment of politicians starts like, hey, here's some money, people with jobs who are shoved money in front of them are going to say, what the hell do you think of me?
Right.
You're insulting me by thinking that you can buy my vote. Right? So that goes away. I mean, the problem of vote buying is directly the result of massive poverty and lack of jobs.
So then what you're saying is, you're not saying the parliamentary system would devoid vote buying. You're just saying the parliamentary system would create a better economy?
No, I'm saying that the parliamentary system would shift focus away from individual candidates and look more into parties. And parties, therefore, they want to get differentiated from each other.
So in the U.S., we have the Democrat Party and the Republican Party. We only have a two-party system, really.
Yeah.
Right?
So in other countries that have parliamentary systems, the parties differentiate themselves by saying, we are the, let's say, Labor Party. We fight for the working man. We want to make things easier for working people. Now, we're the Conservative Party. We want to go for lower taxes or whatever, blah, 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 make things easier for businessmen or, investors, blah, blah, blah. These different parties would differentiate themselves by saying, this is what we stand for. These are the things that we plan to do if you elect us.
So then you're assuming that we could, if under a parliamentary system in the Philippines, we would have the right parties.
We would have a slightly better type of politics. We would have less of the showbiz politics that's going on, where people are talking about who they are, their names, showing their faces, showing their beautiful wives who are basically maybe actors or actresses and all that stuff, or celebrities. They would not be doing that anymore. They would actually be talking about what is our party all about? Why should you vote for us? This is what we stand for. These are the projects that we plan to do if you guys get us elected. That's the main difference. Presidential systems, it's usually about personality. Vote for me. Right. This is my name. Oh, by the way, I happen to be related to this person, blah, blah, blah. I mean, they sort of build up their personalities, their name, whereas in a parliamentary system, they build up their party and what their party stands for.
Okay. So in the States, it's not a parliamentary system, but you have the Democrat and the Republican Party, right?
Yeah.
And so if you chose Joe Biden, you're choosing the Democratic Party. If you choose Donald Trump, you're choosing the Republican Party.
Yeah.
So is it something similar to that?
It's actually quite similar. Now, one thing a lot of Americans need to understand is actually the reason why there's a strict party system in the U.S. is partly because the U.S. presidential system still retains certain features of a parliamentary system. Okay?
Right.
That feature is known as the Electoral College. The Electoral College in the U.S. is actually what truly gets to vote for the president, right? So the way things are, ordinary Americans don't really vote directly for the president, because what happens is you're basically actually voting for the representatives within your state based on the party that they stand for. So you're saying, I want to vote for the Republican guy or the Democrat guy. And if the Democrat wins in the state, then the electoral votes actually go to the Democrat, right? And the same vice versa. If the vote turns out winning for the Republican, then the Republican, how do you say this, electors, the Electoral College representatives are the ones who are brought in. So that actually was designed, the takeoff point for the Electoral College was the original British parliamentary system.
That brings me to my next question. Is it really so much the political system, or is it really the difference between the influence of Spanish colonization versus English colonization? Because all the examples that you've used of the systems that work come from an English system, and the systems that don't work and is full of corruption seems to come from the Spanish system.
I used to think that was it. But when I looked deeper, I went under the hood, I realized that the problems of Latin America, a lot of their political problems are thanks to the fact that they are using presidential systems. Presidential systems that they tweaked because they thought, it would be better to have direct, to do away with the Electoral College that the U.S. has. And by doing so, they actually made things worse. And the Philippines did the same. We also, did away with the need for an electoral college. So we ended up having a majorly, extremely personality focused election. I mean, the system in the States is also focused on personalities, but still you have those party elements. You ended up with a two-party system precisely because of the way the electoral college works in the U.S. They didn't have that in Latin America. Now, among all the Spanish-speaking countries, for example, Spain doesn't use a presidential system. They use a parliamentary system. And lo and behold, they are actually doing a lot better than the other countries in Latin America. And in some cases, some countries in Latin America that have sort of introduced slightly more parliamentary-like features, like say Chile or Uruguay, they tend to also do a little bit better than everyone else who are, doing things in a very, very presidential system way of doing things.
Right.
Yeah. So I just wanted to reiterate that really the fact that the presidential system is very personality oriented, whereas a parliamentary system is much more party oriented,
Right.
makes a huge difference.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you: is there any party system here in the Philippines right now?
There's no real party system in the Philippines, unfortunately, and there's a lot of research by professors, international professors, that shows that presidential systems tend to have lousy party systems or very underdeveloped party systems. And they always bring out the fact that the US is the only country with a presidential system to have a relatively developed party system, and that's thanks to the Electoral College. So that, there's a lot of party dynamics that works thanks to
Right.
the Electoral College.
Gotcha. Okay.
They don't have that in the Philippines nor in Latin America. So everything is so personality focused.
Got it. Okay. So isn't a parliamentary system prone to more instability and coups?
Actually, no. So we'll answer the second question first about coups. Actually, there's this research by the late Dr. Juan Lintz. He was actually half German, half Spanish, but then he worked mostly in the U.S. as a professor of political science. And a lot of his research talks about comparing the two systems. And in his work, he found that really it is in parliamentary systems that you are less prone to having coups d'etats, whereas presidential systems are very much prone to coups d'etats. So what happens is in presidential systems, because they have a separation of powers, so the executive and the legislative are
Right.
kept separate, they end up having gridlock. So they end up having, like in the US, there were shutdowns that happened, right? There's budget shutdowns. In Latin America, because they're third world countries, the effects of these kinds of shutdowns can be really, really disastrous, right? And as a result, the military decides to come in and sort of try to rectify the situation. So they end up having these coups d'etats because of that. Now, instability. There are certain types of electoral systems in a few parliamentary systems that have sometimes been slightly more unstable. There are countries like Italy in the past, and I think even France in the past. I'm talking about pre-1960s, and then also Israel, where there was a slightly greater, somewhat level of instability, in the sense that when they say instability, they mean that there are all these coalitions that are formed, and the coalitions usually get destroyed, or they fall, and then a new prime minister has to emerge and all that. That happened not because of the parliamentary system, but rather because of the electoral system that they had. So they had what are known as low threshold proportional representation systems. What happens in these kinds of situations, where when they say low threshold proportional representation systems, they have an electoral system where if you vote, if the total number of votes for a particular political party is, say, 60%, that party will get 60% of the seats. If this one gets 10% or 15%, they'll get 15% and all that stuff. Now, the problem with proportional representation is if you have a very low threshold, so meaning threshold is this is a cutoff point. If you say, for example, we will not count the votes of parties that do not meet the 5% threshold. If you get only, say, 2% of the votes, you're not counted. You're taken off the list, right? Now, when you have a very low threshold, it allows for the proliferation of so many small parties. So these countries like Italy, pre-Charles de Gaulle France, and say Israel, there was a time when they had so many parties, where they only get probably a few seats here and there. There's so many minor parties, and as a result, you end up not having an outright majority. You might have a party that gets the biggest number of votes, but they don't make it to 50% plus one. They only probably get 30%, right? The biggest party ever only gets 30%. So for them to form a government, they need to coalesce. They need to form coalitions with other parties until they reach that 50% plus one sort of thing. Because of that, they are so prone to losing their majority when one or two little parties withdraw support.
Okay.
And that's the instability part that some people are talking about.
Got it. All right, just break it down to me. Like you talked about 3 very important steps that this country needs to make some real changes, and you think that all these changes will follow. Just give me a summary of what those 3 things are.
Okay, so the 3 things are, number 1, we need to get rid of all the foreign direct investment restrictions that keep foreign companies from easily coming to the Philippines and creating jobs, because we need these companies to come in and create jobs for Filipinos, because there's just not that many jobs here. But we also want to make sure that when they do come in, they're not all just in Metro Manila. We want to make sure that they're spread out to all the different regions so that people don't crowd into Metro Manila and we have the traffic issues and problems and all that. So that's why we need federalism to decentralize the Philippines and give power to each of the different regions so that they can make policies that can attract investors to come over there and not all be in Metro Manila. And last but not the least, we want to make sure that when we do federalize, both the national federal level and the different regions and subunits are all governed properly. And a parliamentary system is known to be much more transparent, much less prone to corruption, much more efficient, much more able to give us good quality leaders. And whenever you end up having some lousy leader out there, he can easily be changed. He can easily be removed and ousted and replaced. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's key. So, guys, let us know what you think. Tell us if you really believe that changing these rules will change the Philippines for the better, or do you think there's something more to this? Please share with us your comments below. Let us know what you really think could help change the Philippines and make this a better place. If you like this podcast, consider subscribing. And please do follow Orion. They can follow you where? On the Correct Movement?
Yes, they can. Well, they can follow my Orion Perez D account on Facebook. They can also follow the Correct Movement, where we post a lot of stuff about these reforms. I'm also an anchor on PGMN, Peanut Gallery Media Network.
Yeah, we did find you there.
And it would be great for people to be able to watch some of the videos that I come out with, where I try to educate the public.
Those videos were excellent. So if you haven't seen Orion in the Peanut Gallery Network, make sure you watch that, because he does a great spiel about this. And make sure you like and subscribe here, and do share this with people you know who needs to hear this. I'll see you in the next episode.